Hello, my name is Dustin McClure, and I'm here today with
Will Sloan.
And you're listening to the Important Cinema Club.
The tingler is loose in this theater. Ladies and gentlemen, please do not panic, but please scream. Scream for your life.
I'm very glad that Will spent a few hours working on his Vincent Price impersonation.
Still not very good.
No, but you know what? If you did it, I could go, well, it's that horror guy. Vincent Price. I mean, Vincent Price is a guy
It's an excellent accent.
that even as a kid, I knew who he was. But I think he's one of those horror actors that you can't really pinpoint a movie that people know him from. You could say the Roger Corman,
Edgar Allan Poe stuff. Well, he's not like Boris Karloff with Frankenstein or Bela Lugosi with Dracula.
Or even Christopher Lee with the Dracula films. Or Peter Cushing with the Frankenstein ones.
That's right.
Vincent Price is, I think, known more as a personality and a presence than he is for one particular film, and that's because he brings that presence to every film role that he did.
And yet, one of the iconic horror presences, to the point where...
Arguably, probably the most iconic, yeah.
I mean, he is the voice in Michael Jackson's Thriller. He is the inventor in Edward Scissorhands.
He is the subject of the short film Vincent, also Tim Burton, about a young boy who wants to be Vincent Price, back when Tim Burton actually had some kind of interesting visual imagination to share.
And a man whose reputation, whose image is still so much a part of the popular imagination that Saturday Night Live, as recently as this decade, had a recurring series of sketches about him.
Yep, starring Bill Hader, who, his impersonation of Vincent Price, not that hot either. Which is, I think, what most people imitate.
Yeah.
So when you think of Vincent Price as a horror personality, what do you think of, Will? Because, I mean, when I think of him, I think of, big, evil, hammy.
The scene that really comes to me first is the opening of House on Haunted Hill. The one where he's narrating it, he's saying who he is, this rich, eccentric man with a spooky house who's inviting all of these people to come and spend a night in his spooky mansion to get $5,000.
$5,000?
I think it's some like that. And the way he narrates it like... I'm not going to do it. I'm losing it.
You're losing it right through your fingers.
I think one of the reasons people like Vincent Price is he finds the material funny, but he also wants to let you in on it. He sort of approaches the audience on his level.
Vincent Price was never a guy that he loved every role that he did, but you can tell that he relishes playing the bad guy. Unlike someone like Boris Karloff, who oftentimes he thinks he's above the material.
And Vincent Price is obviously somebody who has sort of a high-class affect. He's, the sophisticated old world. He has kind of a European quality to him,
Yeah, he does.
He's an art lover and a collector,
kind of.
And so you sort of know that he's above some of the material, but he relishes it, and in fact he wants to have you bring you in on the love.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of Vincent Price,
he's like democratic,
Well, I think of him as a presence. When you go to a Vincent Price film, he's not going to surprise you and you're going to be like, whoa, that was Vincent Price? Because people want something very particular when they go and see him and when people would cast him in roles. Even though that when he started back in the day, he was kind of like a Clark Gable style leading man, a contract player.
Which is kind of hard for me to imagine. I mean, I know he began as a matinee idol and then he eventually became a character actor before becoming the horror guy. But there's something about him that, I don't know, I'm not sure I buy him as a matinee idol. I know that he was handsome.
Yes.
And was regarded as handsome, but not only is his body a little bit strange.
He's very tall.
Very tall, he's got a really long face, and he's got that voice, which is so unusual. I mean, it's,
Well, there's something devilish behind, something... I don't want to say wrong, but almost like evil when he talks, right?
Yeah.
It's difficult to see him as a good guy.
Yeah, and... So, in a movie like Otto Preminger's Laura, when he shows up, and in the first couple of scenes, he's, maintaining his innocence in the murder, you think there's something off about this guy, right? How can this man be innocent?
That's right.
And coupled with the fact that he's not a naturalistic actor.
Well, I think that early on in his career, what he was very good at were those comedic performances. The things that, it let him ham it up a little bit.
In the 40s, after he had his stint as a matinee idol and he transitioned to those roles like Laura, I mean, he's somebody who I buy more as, the dignitary or the judge or the constable,
So
right?
like a position of authority?
I think so. It's like he seems like a character actor elevated to leading man status. You know, he's very theatrical, he's very intense, and he's very comfortable with sort of loquacious dialogue. And when he's delivering the dialogue, there's something kind of unreal about him. It's like he's not somebody who I feel like as a leading man you're quite at ease with. You know?
Well, that's why he's kind of like a secret weapon sometimes for movies to like insert as a character part. And when he's at the center of a film, the film thematically and tonally needs to fit his performance. For example, I watched Theater of Blood, where he plays a crazed Shakespearean actor who is murdering critics who gave him bad reviews. That is like the textbook Vincent Price role.
Well, that's a template of his movies, which goes back to the movie that was the real turning point in his career, House of Wax, where, you know, he used his wax making abilities to have revenge on all the people who wronged him.
Vincent Price, the perfect character for him, is someone who's been wronged and wants revenge.
The Mad Magician, which was the rip-off movie that he made the year after of House of Wax.
Or The Abominable Dr. Phibes, where he plays another guy who wants revenge on the people that hurt him.
Yeah.
Like, that is, I think, that when you're talking about, like, an actor, what role does he fill? That is the perfect Vincent Price role. Which is why when you watch something like Last Man on Earth, which I know me and Will watched recently, that you can understand why Richard Matheson, the writer of the novel and the screenplay, was actually so angered about the final version of the movie that he took his name off of the screenplay. Because his film was about the everyman, and then they cast Vincent Price in that role.
And I do think he's a little awkward in The Last Man on Earth.
I mean, I can understand the position that Matheson was taking when he said, like, this is not what I imagined, but at the same time, it's almost like, oh, someone with Vincent Price's personality, of course he's the last man on Earth. Who else could survive?
That's true. Well, The Last Man on Earth, which was released in 1964, well into Vincent Price's middle-aged hood, and well into his status as a horror icon. This was, I think, an Italian production that was supposed to look American. Is it set in, like, San Francisco or something?
Yes, it is supposed to be American.
But it's obviously Rome.
Yes.
Like, there are opening establishing shots of Rome.
Yes.
And it definitely feels like one of those movies that was cobbled together as sort of an international co-pro, where it's like, okay, who's available, who we can sort of pre-sell this to a lot of territories with? Oh, Vincent Price.
Yeah, that's right. I think he's fine in the movie.
Yeah.
I think the film, as of almost like an art horror picture, works. I can understand why it has disappointed young teens seeing it in the shock theater package for decades, because it's not the horror movie you want it to be.
Last Man on Earth, of course, is the precursor to The Omega Man, based on the same story.
And the classic Will Smith picture, I Am Legend.
And it was also a key inspiration for Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah, it's crazy watching the movie, considering that Night of the Living Dead had not come out yet, because the stylistic kind of conceits are the same that Night of the Living Dead would use.
Yeah, so during the day, he's the last man on Earth, but then at night, these zombie-type creatures, who are actually vampires, come out at night and they, you know, siege his home like the Romero zombies do.
And basically...
And they say weird things overdubbed on the dialogue. Like, there's one zombie who goes, "Come out! Come out!" So they can talk.
They can talk. In the book, or I guess the novel that Richard Matheson wrote, the movie's actually pretty close to it, being that the ending, what's supposed to happen, and the film kind of pushes towards it, but doesn't really land it, is the idea that he's the last man on Earth, but he's the villain to these people. Mm-hmm. He's the boogeyman going and killing them.
And they want to create a new society.
Yeah, and he's this monster trying to keep that from happening. Mm-hmm. And it's out of all the movies that we just mentioned, it's actually the one that comes closest to that, except for the Vincent Price performance, which is big. He gets to do like this voiceover where he's like, the garlic, it's losing its power. They hate mirrors as well.
Yeah. He also has a nice little mustache, which he maintains during the apocalypse.
He is very well groomed. Listen, you gotta keep yourself sane somehow.
So I actually do like Vincent Price in this movie, even though I said he was a bit awkward in it, because in addition to everything else, in addition to the fact that he's like the master of evil and he's a great puppet master in some of these movies, there's also a vulnerable side to him, which is why he works in all these revenge movies. There's something about him, you know, he plays sad very well.
Yeah, he does. Well, because it's like the big personality when you
and he's a large man, too.
When you ask it to deliver longing or loss,
he fills up the screen.
Exactly. You get even more of that when it's on screen. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's why he works so well in that Roger Corman cycle of movies that he made.
Well, he's very good in the the Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe movies, and as much as we're talking about him being a ham and being big, he could also be a very understated actor, too.
I mean, in House of Usher, he plays it very small.
Right. There's something just about him, like, he has this otherworldly, offbeat affect to him with that voice and with that face of his that actually he can sometimes do very little and give off a lot. In some of the movies, he just sort of raises an eyebrow and it seems to speak volumes. In House of Usher, he's very subtle.
You know, it makes me think of, like, what would he have done if Corman had not kind of swooped in and pushed him in that direction? Because he did already have a kind of horror background at that point.
Right. So he, after working at Universal in the 30s, and in fact, he came up through theater, he was a member of Orson Welles' Mercury Theater.
He was! And I think that he's a perfect Welles player. Why isn't he in any of the movies?
I actually do think he has a bit of an Orson Welles vibe to him at times.
Yeah.
Like, I'm talking like Citizen Kane era Welles.
Could you have a Vincent Price as Kane in Citizen Kane?
I mean, it would probably be a different... I'm envisioning it in my mind right now. That scene where Susan Alexander is crying on the floor about her bad reviews and he yells at her.
Yeah.
I could totally see Vincent Price doing that.
I could see... I mean, the thing about Vincent Price is even at his youngest, he never really looked very young.
Yeah, because he was so big and large and awkward
But
looking.
I imagine, the low angles looking up at the ceiling with Vincent Price at the center.
He had a 7-year contract at Fox, and you'll often see him pop up in Fox movies from the 40s, such as Laura, The Song of Bernadette, A Royal Scandal, and another movie that was sort of pushed him in the horror direction, Dragonwyck, by, I think, Joseph Mankiewicz.
Yep, it was Mankiewicz, like the gothic kind of romance.
Yeah. He was also the voice of the Invisible Man in one of those movies.
Yeah, Return of the Invisible Man. I think it was his 3rd or 4th role, and he also appears very briefly at the end of Abbott and Costello as the Invisible Man.
Oh, I was hoping to get in on the fun. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm the Invisible Man. Classic. So, House of Wax, the big turning point in 53.
Let me get my ping pong racket out. Boop, boop, boop,
well, House of Wax was the most popular of all the big 3D movies from the 1950s. It was, a top 5 box office movie of that year. And, of course, it has the scene where the ping pong man with a ping pong paddle comes out halfway through and just ping-pongs his paddle straight into the camera.
I think he's doing a bunch of stuff. It's just a guy like, whoa, look at this. Whoa.
I mean, I have had the great fortune to see House of Wax in 3D.
Yeah, does it hold up?
It was a great experience.
Listen, that's not the way that Andre de Toth expected to see the movie, because he only had one eye and the 3D didn't work for him.
Well, as Andre de Toth said in an interview, Beethoven didn't hear the music either. And he was right. It's a great 3D movie.
There you go. So after that, like you said, it kind of cemented his persona. Now, if you watch like interviews or documentaries about him, people like his daughter, who kind of became his biographer later on in life, will say stuff like, he just loved playing villains. Sure, I guess like retroactively he probably feels that way.
I do wonder, because whenever you read about Vincent Price, whenever you watch documentaries about him, see him interviewed, he unfailingly gives off the impression of being a happy, avuncular kind of guy. He's not somebody like Bela Lugosi, who, I mean, unlike Bela Lugosi, he kept working to the end. But he's not like some of the other stars who seem to resent their typecasting.
Well, I feel like Vincent Price is one of those people that he was allowed to kind of show other sides of his personality. Like, when people talk about him, I mean, people that are knowledgeable about him, they say, like, he had a great art collection, he wrote a bunch of cookbooks, he had a lot of friends, he would go on game shows. Did you see that clip of him on the $64,000 question?
Yeah, and in fact, I love this side of Vincent Price, the fact that he was a real Renaissance man in real life. In the 1960s and 70s, he established, so he donated a lot of his work to create an art museum at a community college in California. He also established this project, the Vincent Price Fine Art Collection at Sears Roebuck.
Yep.
So, and because he very much believed that art should be for the masses. So people could go to Sears Roebuck and buy prints of Picasso, Dali, Rembrandt, all personally hand-selected by Mr. Price himself. I mean, he also, in the 80s, went on tour with a one-man show as Oscar Wilde.
See, that's the thing about Vincent Price, right? Is that he got, it feels like, to do a bunch of stuff that he wanted to. Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff, you feel that they're like trapped in these roles, these horror icons, and they never liked it. And they weren't able to do this other stuff.
I assume Vincent Price must have been pretty savvy with his money.
Yeah, that's probably what it was.
Because, I mean, you can't build an art collection if you're not. I watched a A&E biography of him where Dennis Hopper was in it, saying that basically the first time he ever saw abstract expressionism was at Vincent Price's house, because he had these like Jackson Pollock paintings before any museums had them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what separates him, again, from all those people, even though that as his career, like, he had his ups and downs. Like, if he's in an Italian co-production, that's definitely a down in his career.
Right.
I mean, he also starred in, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but Confessions of an Opium Eater.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
Oh my God, it is so wild. It's like a stream of consciousness, like, pulp nightmare of Vincent Price just in this fake Chinatown. The movie takes place essentially in real time as he like flies a kite and then climbs up the kite to a room where then he's attacked by a bunch of guys. And that movie is a perfect example of Vincent Price being completely miscast as like a swashbuckling hero, which is like not a role that he can play.
It is interesting that among all the big horror actors, he's the one who... You may associate him more with horror than anybody, but you also don't just associate him with horror. I mean, he was in the Ten Commandments, for instance. He's in. Have you seen Samuel Fuller's The Baron of Arizona?
I have not seen that one.
Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah.
Does he have a big meaty role in that?
Yeah.
I mean, has Vincent Price ever had a role that wasn't big and meaty? It's like his personality. It's impossible for it not to be that.
Later in his career, I haven't seen it, but in the late 80s, he was in a film, The Whales of August, with Lillian Gish and Bette Davis.
That's right. It was kind of like a TV movie-ish thing. I watched that same A&E documentary you did, and they show clips of it, and you're like, yeah, it's not the big kind of like Max Rose. I mean, because like Vincent Price, near the end of his life, he's one of those guys that like, while he was out there and he was a personality, it never felt like sad. I mean, I wasn't there to watch it, but like when people talk about it, it's not tinged with that like, the things he wished he could have done.
I watched a great interview with him from, I think, 1986, where he was promoting The Great Mouse Detective.
Yes, which he said was one of his favorite roles because he got to sing 2 songs in it.
There was an interview with him where he's at, some beautiful estate that he owned, and he's holding this little statue that the Disney company had sent him of his character. He said, "Oh, this is the rat that I play." And he's, laughing his way through the interview talking about all these movies he made that were really bad. "Oh, that movie is on every list of the 50 worst films ever made, which is an achievement unto itself."
I mean, that's what's fun about Vincent Price, is you feel like he's having a ball doing what he's doing, whether it be like that or appearing on the Batman TV show.
Well, I did revisit
You did?
one of his episodes on the Batman TV show.
Wait, he had more than one?
He had, I think, 2, because...
Eggman episodes.
Yeah, because you remember that it was always a cliffhanger, so there were... he had
that's right,
a 2-episode arc and then another 2-parter.
Did he ever team up with his good friend Otto Preminger?
Sadly, no.
Oh,
but
no.
yeah, I did watch one of them where he plays Egghead.
Yep, that's right.
Who is the cleverest villain, one of the smartest minds. And in the episode I watched, he cleverly deduces who Batman is, because he kidnaps, 3, super rich Gothamites. And he says, "I deduced that Batman would have had to have been somebody very wealthy because crime fighting is an expensive hobby." And it's like, yeah,
that's smart.
He is the smartest villain. How come nobody had ever thought of that?
I mean, Vincent Price, near the end of his career, I don't want to say that he didn't say no to anything.
Oh, he could be bought, for sure.
I mean, he narrated 130 episodes of the classic Canadian show, the hilarious House of Frightenstein, which I think a lot of people associate him with.
Before we finish, let's talk a little bit about those Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe movies.
Probably his defining, I think, series of films. I mean, people may argue the William Castle films, but come on, guys, go watch those movies again. I mean, Vincent Price is fun in them, but...
Well, the William Castle movies, what people remember about those is John Waters talking about the gimmicks that they used.
Yeah, that's right.
So House on Haunted Hill, what was it? Was it Emergo? Was that the technology he called?
Yeah, I think it was Emergo, because it was a skeleton on the wire that went across the audience.
And of course, the Tingler, for those who don't know, which is a little tingle. It was
zap.
It was a mix between a lobster and a crab, and it would get inside your body and it would zap you. And then there comes a point when screen goes black and he says, "The Tingler is loose in this theater," and Ideally, all the seats would be wired with a buzzer, but in the smaller towns, it was maybe 10 seats.
I really hope that someone listening to this podcast has never heard of this before.
I think some people have it. Yeah.
Because I think it's one of the most famous, I think, movie gimmicks.
Yeah.
And other than that, there's the Corman film, and those ones have no gimmicks. The only gimmick was that Corman, at this part of his career, had been doing double bills for AIP. Vincent Price, at this point, had already been kind of an AIP contract player.
Well, AIP was kind of a bottom of the barrel. I mean, it wasn't a Poverty Row company.
Because they didn't exist anymore.
But, after the studios lost control of their movie theater chains because of the Supreme Court decision, AIP came in to supply cheap material for the grindhouses and the movie theaters that they didn't previously have access to.
Yeah, and so they got Vincent Price on their staple. He starred in a whole bunch of movies.
And Corman's idea for House of Usher was, instead of making 2 cheap black and white movies for a double bill, what if we spent that money to make one better color movie?
79 minutes.
79 minutes, and he had a luxurious 15-day shooting schedule.
That's right. And, the AIP bosses were like, whoa, House of Usher, what's the beast in this? What? And Corman said, the house is the monster.
And that's why there's a scene in the movie where Vincent Price goes, the house lives, the house breathes.
That's right. And the film is a very slow-paced, luxurious, kind of atmospheric motion picture.
Yeah, I think I like House of Usher quite a bit. I like Vincent Price's,
blonde hair.
Blonde-haired, startling kind of iconic performance. He's like the male Garbo.
You a big, Mark Hamill fan? That old block of wood at the center of the movie?
No, I mean, so this is probably the problem with the Edgar Allan Poe movies, is that it's always, Vincent Price owns the big mansion, and then he's visited by some charisma-free, young doofus.
Probably pop star or something like that.
Who comes and, he's missing his sister, or he wants to see his wife, or something like that, and Vincent Price is holding her hostage in the basement.
I mean, there's a bunch of different Corman Poe films. I mean, one of them is not a Poe film, The Haunted Palace, which is a Lovecraft adaptation.
Right, but they still called it Edgar Allan
Poe's The Haunted Palace. There's the comedy one he did with Boris Karloff, The Raven, where they're shooting energy beams at each other.
The Pit and the Pendulum is great, of course, and then there's the one that is universally considered the best, Mask of the Red Death.
The one shot by Nick Rogue himself.
With beautiful psychedelic colors.
Yeah, and then you also have the one that the real connoisseurs say that it's their favorite, the Martin Scorsese's out there, which is, I'm going to say the title incorrectly, Tomb of Ligeia?
The Tomb of Ligeia.
Ligeia, there you go. Add an extra R in it.
And that's the only one that was shot on location. And that's the one where Vincent Price
And that was the last one, too, I believe.
That's right. Price is 30 years too old for it.
Yeah.
But I actually...
near the end of his career, he's usually 30 years too old for everything that he plays.
I do love the Tomb of Ligeia. It's just kind of I find it just a beautiful kind of atmospheric, melancholy. I'm just, rattling platitudes here. But...
Well, if House of Usher is the dry run, Tomb of Ligeia is like the final, ultimate version of the Corman Poe Price picture. And after that, Vincent Price would get into Gothic stuff, but because it was so prevalent and those Poe pictures were very successful, it went the way that anything successful goes. It becomes a joke. So you have stuff like House of Long Shadows, which Price is like, not so hot in.
Yeah.
But then near the end of his career, you get him, he got that last little boost at the end from people like Tim Burton, from people like Michael Jackson. You even had people like Jeff Burr and Courtney C. Joyner. They actually went to his house, and I think that he was either mowing his lawn or something like that, and he's like, oh yeah, come in guys, let's have a talk. And he ended up being in their movie, The Offspring, or as it's also known now as From a Whisper to a Scream, in the bookends.
Before we end the episode, another thing about his screen presence that maybe bears mentioning is the fact that he seems a little gay. I would hate to, end this discussion on such a vulgar topic as the man's sexuality, but I feel like to honestly reckon with him on screen, that's kind of part of it, right? Like he has this...
but what do you think? You said that he doesn't feel camp to you? Isn't that kind of...
Well, I mean... I might have to pull out my Susan Sontag essay to get the exact correct definition of camp.
Yeah.
But it's like camp is something that's unintentional.
Oh, that's right. And Vincent Price,
Right.
he's very intentional
so
in what he's doing.
Greta Garbo wouldn't have thought of herself as camp. Marlene Dietrich
right, yeah.
wouldn't. But he knows it's a joke. He knows it's kind of silly. And I mean, I think he was bisexual in real life. But
I don't know. I would believe it, yes.
But there's something like just...
No one can see the Will shaking his head, hands up in the air.
Yeah, like there's something about him that seems a little strange.
And you think that he has that over people like Bela Lugosi?
I think so, yeah.
Or Boris Karloff. Yeah, Bela swung both words.
Bela Lugosi seems very heterosexual to me.
Yeah, so manly.
Yeah. So Vincent Price, good man, good actor. I like him.
Yeah, lived a full life.
Wish I could have met him.
What would you? You've probably been very polite and nice. And...
Yeah, I would have asked him about art and listened to him talk. So on our Patreon this week, we talked about another horror classic, the Brian De Palma film Wise Guys.
Oh, wow! The one that stars two heavyweights, Danny DeVito, Joe Piscopo. Actually, way more than two heavyweights, because you also have Captain Lou Albano, the Super Mario himself.
So we picked this consciously because it's everybody's least favorite Brian De Palma movie.
The Irishman is coming out.
Yeah, Harvey Keitel.
Yeah, is in both movies.
And also because Joe Piscopo is in it.
Yeah, and Will has never gotten a platform to Piscopo out. And finally on this podcast, he can do that. You can listen to it by becoming a Patreon subscriber, $5 a month, and you can go to patreon.com/theimportantcinemaclub and subscribe. All right, in November, we're going to try to do No, we're not going to try. We will. We'll do filmmakers or artists, depending on what it is, from countries that we have never talked about. Almost 200 episodes. There's still countries we haven't touched.
There are most countries we haven't touched.
Like Hong Kong.
We've basically talked about 3 countries.
Yes, that's right. Canada, a little bit. One or two episodes. So we'll be talking about the Czech director, animator, Jan Schwankmajer.
The most famous movie is Alice.
Yeah, he also did Faust, and he did Little Otik. He was known mostly for his very surreal stop-motion short film. So I'm excited to dive into that. Not a lot of movies to watch.
And by the way, please send us some letters.
Yes, importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com.
Because if we need to pad these episodes, we will. Yeah. So please send us long letters with lots of questions.
That's right. So again, that's importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. Okay, so until next week, my name's Desmond Glue.
I'm Will Sloan.
Thanks for listening.
Last week, Toronto recaptured the Grindhouse experience.
Yes.
Because Justin Decloux took over a theater called the Grand Gerard, which is in the East End of Toronto. The East End being a vast expanse that most of us on the West End never go.
Well, you don't even live on the West End, do you? You live, like, downtown.
Yeah, I live on the border of the East and West End.
Yeah, that's right. And
I only ever turn left.
So, the Grand Gerard is this theater that was built like 30 years ago, and it's still the same seats, hasn't really changed.
And every year,
every 5 years,
somebody comes along and tries to do something with it.
So I just asked on Twitter, I was like, hey, is there anywhere I could do like a 24-hour movie marathon? And I didn't actually want a theater. I wanted like a room where I could put like maybe 30 seats or something like that, because that would have been perfect. But the Grand Gerard reached out and they're like, hey, yeah, do it here. And I said, okay, but it needs to be a surprise marathon. So I'm not saying any titles for
so that nobody
money
sees you.
Yeah, because I'm not going to make enough money to actually make it worthwhile otherwise. And so I worked really hard on getting the perfect program for the 10 to 20 people who stayed the entire 24 hours.
Plus other dilettantes like myself who drift in and out.
Yeah, that's right. But I'm not going to lie. The main reason, the one movie that was on my list right at the beginning was the one that played at midnight. So you showed up at the beginning where I showed Anguish.
Which I liked.
Yeah, if people haven't seen Anguish, it's a very disturbing movie that I actually don't want to talk about too much because it spoils what it's actually about. Mm-hmm. If you search it on Google, you'll see, and you read a little bit, you'll find out. So go in blind, I don't know, find a DVD or something like that. But let me just say it was the perfect movie to start in a movie theater, especially a bit of a disreputable one.
Yeah. Don't read anything about it before you watch it.
And so, other than that, I told Will what I was playing at midnight, which was the first film I had on my list, which was the Important Cinema Club favorite, Roger Watkins' Last House on Dead End Street.
Yeah, so I was like, oh shit, okay, I gotta figure out a way to make this work. So I went out somewhere else, and then I took an expensive cab ride back to the Grand Gerard to get there for midnight.
Yeah.
And it was the best possible way to see Last House on Dead End Street because, you know, the place was just a bit drafty and it was midnight and I was kind of falling asleep and the theater was kind of run down and it felt a bit like a grindhouse.
It does. It looks and feels like a grindhouse. I gotta say that the people at the Grand Girard are very nice. Like, they were very open and helpful with everything that I did.
All that's missing is somebody, like, pissing their pants and right. Somebody stabbing you in the aisle.
I have to say that near early in the morning, it was raining incredibly hard the entire time, and the roof started to leak, so you heard like the bloop, 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 bloop on a bunch of seats.
I mean, that sort of added to my experience watching Last House on Dead End Street, sort of in this unfamiliar neighborhood, very confused and wet.
Yes.
Watching this deeply unpleasant, diseased movie.
Watching the movie, sitting in the audience, thankfully my friend Adam showed up at that time, and I was sitting beside him, and I was like, oh man, this is a lot more unpleasant than I remember it being.
Oh my
God. Distance between me sitting at home and being like, yeah, man, I'm going to show this to an unsuspecting audience, and having to sit in that audience and watch it.
Oh, holy shit. I mean, when it's on a big screen and there's no escape from it.
Yeah. Well, I got to point out, there's one little thing that added to my discomfort, which was at the beginning of the marathon, a very nice man and woman and their child, who I later found out was 8 years old, just gonna pass for 12, showed up, and they were like, we're gonna stay the entire time. And I was like, oh yeah, sure, good luck. Well, they did.
And so by the time Last House on Dead End Street
started,
around,
I was like, oh,
Last House on Dead End Street, a movie that contains a scene where a nude woman in blackface is whipped at a party.
I had forgotten about that scene.
Yeah.
Because, you know, when you think of Last House on Dead End Street, you remember that last 30 minutes.
Yeah.
That's the thing that's the most memorable.
But everything before that is very ugly and depraved,
there's like a rape scene as well.
I mean, it really feels like a snuff film.
It does. And
so did the 8-year-old like it?
No, because the 8-year-old did not watch it. Her dad put a blanket on her head for that movie.
So she heard the amazing score.
She said, I did not fall asleep, and all I heard was screaming the entire time. But she was all like giddy, and she had so much fun the entire time.
Oh, nice.
Can you imagine being 8 years old and your parents taking you to that? I asked her, and I was like, was it tough to convince your parents to take you to this? And she was like, oh boy, yeah, it was so hard. And her dad was like, we didn't know what the movies were, so that was taking a chance. And I was like, yeah, they were probably a little bit rough, because after Last House on Dead End Street, I played Splatter Farm, which you can hear me talk about on No Such Thing as a Bad Movie, it's not the equivalent of Last House on Dead End.
It's a home movie.
It is, but it's like teenagers trying to be as gross as they can in the 80s. Mm-hmm. The kid was not covered up for that one, but she said that she had a blast because it's so impoverished. It feels like a joke.
I feel like when you're 8 years old, you may have the energy to be able to kind of make it 24 hours.
She did. She fell asleep for like 3 of the movies near the end. Because, I mean, I can go through the movie. So it was Anguish, and then it was Stage Fright, Mikhail Suave's, and then it was the Hong Kong movie. I played a Japanese film. I think it's like The Legend of the Ghost Cat, which was one that I discovered because I'm like, I gotta need some deep cuts for people that have never seen stuff. And then I showed like, you know, popular stuff near the end, but in the middle I played Dementia, also known as Daughter of Horror.
I love. That's an amazing kind of... Did you play the version that has Ed McMahon?
No, I played no voiceover. Because I literally told people, I'm like, I want you to fall asleep during this movie and wake up and be like, what's going on? Because there's no dialogue. It's all music. It's like a woman's voice singing the entire time. And after that, as if I was going to give like, you know, I'm going to bring up the energy. Nope. I showed Messiah of Evil, the William Hayek and Gloria Katz movie. And, you know, it's funny that, like, every movie I showed, it was someone's favorite movie. So that's good.
Nice.
That's what you want for a marathon like that. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that was fun. I wish more people had shown up. It was still pretty good.
It was a good attendance when I was there. I mean, you know, 24 hours is a lot.
But I want at least like 100 right from the get-go.
How many certificates of completion did you give out?
I think I gave 15 or 20 of people that stayed for like the full 24 hours. People left and came back, which I encourage. So that's fine. Even though I'm like, all the good movies are in the wee hours of the morning when you're sleep deprived. Did I fall asleep? Of course I did. I'm not going to stay for 24 hours.
You've seen all those movies.
Yeah, a lot of them I saw. Even though I was like, I want to sleep during Dementia. And I couldn't. I was just staring at it the entire time. It was more near the wee hours of the morning that I finally conked out. All right. Another thing that recently happened is that My Name is Dolomite came out on Netflix.
Oh, yeah. I watched it the day it came out.
Did you?
Yeah.
What'd you think?
I had a great time.
Yeah. It's one of those movies that it's like, you know, I can understand that, like, I wish maybe it was a little bit, like, darker.
Or a little less conventional.
Yeah, but...
It's super satisfying.
It's like Dolomite. I mean, Rudy Ray Moore getting a Hollywood biopic. How absurd is that?
Yeah, it's insane. By the Ed Wood boys.
And you got Eddie Murphy, Wesley Snipes.
Wesley Snipes is
so
great in
good.
it.
Yeah.
It's sort of, the blaxploitation Ed Wood, but the difference is that I don't think, unlike in Ed Wood, there aren't moments where you laugh at the incompetence.
That's right. You're never laughing at Rudy Ray Moore.
I thought for sure there would be a lot of jokes about the boom mic.
Yes.
And there weren't.
There's one little joke.
There's one scene where there's the boom mic, but they don't even draw attention to it.
No,
really.
they don't.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't even think about that when seeing that. Yeah, you're right. Ed Wood, it's like, this guy's a joke, and he doesn't know he's a joke. While in My Name is Dolomite, it's like, oh no, he wants to do this, and he's committed, even though he doesn't know how to do it.
So another thing I like about the movie is that the goal is never for Rudy Ray Moore to get institutional validation. Mm-hmm. So early in the movie, he can't get anything off the ground. He tries his new Dolomite character. No record company will pick him up. So he's like, fine, I'm going to sell my records out of the back of my trunk. And then the record company picks him up. Mm-hmm. And then he makes the movie independently. No movie studio will pick it up. So
he just does his own premiere.
He four-walls it, and then they take notice. And the fact that they take notice isn't the triumph. The triumph is that he's now going to reach more people.
Yes, that's right.
Right? So it doesn't matter that the studio gets it. Mm-hmm. I also like that scene where they go see the front page.
So good.
The Billy Wilder
We talked
movie.
about it when the trailer came out, that that Larry and Scott sat down and they were like, what is the perfect unfunny movie that they could go and see?
The perfect unfunny movie that
that white people would find funny.
To a white audience would seem like a funny movie.
That's right.
Because it's got Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau. It's Billy Wilder.
Now, do you take offense that they say they're filming Dolomite and then you see scenes from the Human Tornado?
I noticed that, yes.
Yeah, you did.
But no, I don't take offense because the scene they picked is an iconic moment.
From Human Tornado, yeah. The thing about Dolomite is, it's not really the fun one that people remember. It's when they're thinking of crazy Rudy Ray Moore stuff.
They think of Petey Wheatstraw.
Yeah, Petey Wheatstraw, my favorite Rudy Ray Moore movie.
Can we get a sequel about Disco Godfather?
Yeah, but where is Wesley Snipes going to come into that? Now we're on Oscar Watch. What is that website?
Awards Daily.
Awards Daily. Okay, so is Eddie Murphy in the running? Was Adam Sandler as Best Actor?
Well, how I wouldn't know that. How would I don't know who's in the running.
Based on just performance of just seeing these roles. Because you've seen Uncut Gems. You've seen My Name is Dolomite.
Look, I would love them both to be nominated.
That's right.
but I reject the premise of your question. I think the Academy Awards, especially in this day and age, are immoral.
Why are they immoral?
Because we've got children in detention centers at the border. We've got.
Why are we even recording this podcast, Will? What's the stuff going on?
Well, it's fine to appreciate art, but what's not fine is for rich people to give each other trophies on TV anymore.
So you're not going to watch the Oscars?
No, I'll watch it.
Of course you will.